Ciao, I'm Franca with Cigar Sense. We never did this before. When our panel meets every month, we talk about many different topics every time. After our latest meeting, I thought some of you might be interested in what we talk about. So this clip covers saliva. Why is saliva important when we smoke a cigar? Why does it sometimes increase so much? And what can we do about it? I hope you'll find this interesting. And if you do, please let us know by liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Saliva. Val, so you had asked this question. I've done some research and I double checked with our sensory advisor. And so you were saying sometimes you produce a lot of saliva when smoking a cigar. And I guess that doesn't only happen to you, but to a lot of us. Is that good or bad? And what is normal? That was the question, right?
Yeah. And I always keep a little cup handy just in case I don't feel like I can swallow that. And I'll tell you what precipitated that question. I do a lot of wine and whiskey tasting. And with wine, if you're going through a lot of wine, you do spit. With some whiskeys, same thing, you know, in a technical. But what I noticed was when I was trying to get novices used to drinking like a potent, a powerful whiskey, a cask strength whiskey that's got, let's say, over 60% alcohol, I would recommend to them that you know, quite often what we'll do with a whiskey or a wine, we just take it in and we swallow it straight back. We don't get it to the sides or the front. And so I mentioned to them, take a wee bit of that whiskey and really swish it around in your mouth, hit all the points, get your saliva working, because what happens is your saliva can help soften that whiskey, making it more palatable for somebody who's not accustomed to it, making it easier to swallow. And when it came to cigars, I didn't have that option because I didn't even want to swallow that saliva with water. One of the other things that got me thinking about it was when I am tasting a cigar that where the smoke creates unpleasant interactions with my saliva, I'm thinking to myself, I'll bet you this producer is just thinking, I don't have to worry about what's how the smoke is interacting with the saliva, because chances are the consumer is having a beverage with that cigar, likely something sweet or coffee or something, and that helps wash everything down. But that doesn't happen in an assessment situation. So that's why I really started thinking about what role does saliva play? And I was really glad to read more about some of the in-depth studies on saliva.
No, that's great. And maybe you can share some links if you want. So basically, what is normal is that we need some liquid in our mouth to help. So there are some flavor molecules that are soluble in liquids. So those flavor molecules then are facilitated by having some liquid in our mouth. So it is important for our receptors to perceive them. And besides the type of product that we are testing, so the smoke, which does actually dry our mouth naturally, that is also why it's good to drink water when we test cigars. Saliva production varies from person to person. So there are people who naturally produce more saliva than others. There are also times in the day where our saliva production is higher. For instance, when we approach the meals time, like late in the morning or at the end of the afternoon, and we feel a little bit more hungry, it's like our body is preparing to the next meal and our saliva starts to be produced in a bigger quantity. There are also people who smoke more wet, more moist, meaning there are some people who either hold a cigar with their teeth or make the whole head of the cigar pretty wet. And so there are personal variances in the saliva production. But when we have an increased saliva production, we're testing a cigar and we feel like, oh my God, what's going on? It's because there is often some sort of off flavor, because the body reacts by producing more saliva to try and help us expel some toxins as well.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So it can be, and it can just be some spiciness, some irritants, some bitterness. It can be any sensation. And as you said, and you're a good sommelier, so you always have this, the how do you call it, the spit cup next to you. Even when you smoke a cigar, you might have, now that you know, you might have that feeling of, this is something bad, I need to spit it out rather than swallowing it. And so it's interesting because sometimes you look at the cut head of the cigar while you smoke, and sometimes it is more black than other times. Have you noticed?
Yes.
So it could be an indicator. It could be that mortar and condensate is piling up there. So one thing that we could do is, if drinking water doesn't help the rinsing out of those sensations, those off flavor sensations, we can try to cut again a little bit the head of the cigar and try to see if that helps eliminate some more of that condensate. If it continues, and it is like, I had sometimes cigars that were really so bitter, and you can drink all the water you want, but it's really the cigar that continues to deliver that. Then at a certain point, it's up to us to decide whether to continue testing it or not.
And on my last batch, there was one cigar, the smoke itself wasn't bitter, but the wrapper was incredibly bitter. And it made for a very bad experience, but the smoke itself was okay. And I thought that was interesting too, that the bitterness from the wrapper didn't transfer to the smoke.
Yeah, well, but at that point, if you eliminate the wrapper and you continue the rest of the blend because that doesn't have the off flavor, then yeah, it's no longer the cigar. So, and it are really off flavors when it's like that. I mean, there is personal preference, of course. Some people may like a little bit of bitterness, and there's personal preference. But when it's really strong bitter, that your saliva really continues to increase and you just sense that, you don't sense anything else, that's definitely an off flavor. That's definitely something that went completely wrong in some of the processes of production. So I don't know if this answered.
Well, I'm even finding, like, I'm smoking, I pulled a cigar from way back in my humidor. It's a back-to-back. And at the start, there was some bitterness. And now you're right. Sometimes the bitterness isn't offensive. And it's actually more curious. It's not, it's okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's adding actually to the cigar.
Yeah.
To your point about whether people smoke wet or dry, I didn't even realize there was a difference.
Yeah.
And now that's all I see.
You know, that's also funny. When people complain about a bad cigar draw, try to notice if they smoke dry or wet, because a lot of times draw problems can be caused by the smoker. They create themselves some draw issues on their own cigars. And sometimes it happens that they might blame the manufacturer. In fact, it's their way of smoking the cigar.
That's interesting. You know, again, this is very, very helpful. And I had attended a virtual event. I forget the name, but he mentioned that, you know, if you're smoking socially and you're having a bit of difficulty with the smoke, just, you know, have a sweet beverage to the side, because that helps, you know, I guess you could say level everything out. But you're absolutely right. The more you talk to, you know, the producers and listen to what they say, you learn a lot about those aspects of the cigar that can make us question
Mhm.
the cigar itself.
Of course, because any flavor that you add with a drink, with food, masks the natural flavors of the cigar. You might remember, guys, Constantine's lesson on the priming of our buds of last year. I can send you the link again, but that really spoke very well to anything that is not water and how it affects every time the natural flavor of the cigar. And I mean, of course, when you are smoking in a social environment, then yeah, you have to do whatever you feel like to focus on what you want, what you like. When we test, it's totally different. And we can't just balance off any off flavor with some sweetener or whatever else. Otherwise, it's no longer the cigar that we describe, it is what we want from the cigar that we describe.
I also found it interesting, Chem sent me a couple of articles, and some of the tests they did on rats was they conditioned rats to distill water to see the impact of saliva with rats that are conditioned to distilled water. And I remember our session where, you know, some people think it's okay to drink distilled water.
So we're talking here about distilled, like filtered water versus tap water.
Yeah.
Tap water, depending on the cities, etc., it contains a lot of other elements like chlorine and all this sort of stuff. And again, they are not neutral. They do affect the flavors. But you know, on the saliva production, then I don't know how each element affects the saliva production. Of course, I should do more research about that.
No, it's very interesting, and I think it is worthy of additional study.
Yeah, it is definitely. Oh, there are so many aspects connected to what we do that would deserve research. That's true. Anyway, we keep it going. We cover every time a little aspect, and so that's great.